My father wasn't the only one living a lie. I have a younger brother, and he wants to be a part of my life. Chapter 1. Strip. I met his steely blue gaze instantly. There was lust flickering there, dancing in his eyes. My heart sprang to my throat as I quivered with excitement. The fact that we were on the terrace, mid-morning, and had literally just been talking about work barely entered my mind. Jacob Whitmore was a man who got what he wanted, and he wanted to see all of me. Now, it had been a year since he took me into that stairwell. A year since the billionaire Dom had awoken the secret desires inside me. The days melted into weeks that poured into months, but I felt the same electric need, turning me inside out. One word. Strip. I rose to my feet, drinking in his handsome, stoic face. He was forged from marble and stone, perfection and power in the flesh. He'd uttered a single word, and the rest of the world was forgotten. I uttered too. Yes, sir. I had no time to run through the kinky possibilities that awaited me. A smile fluttered across my lips as I fingered the silk knot of my robe. I had no choice but to obey. It was my destiny to be Jacob's. It felt like a lifetime since he'd first commanded my body, like it was made for him, and him alone. But I still came alive, just like it was the first time he had dominated me. I was captured by his piercing blue gaze, and I shed my robe. He saw it all. The thickness of my thighs and softness in my middle that long hours at Whitmore and Creighton, and a fondness for white chocolate mochas had spawned. Yet he still looked at me like I was the sexiest thing he'd ever seen. He looked at me like I was his fairy tale ending. His eyebrow arched, and the longing in his eyes became lethal. Those delicious lips of his became a tight line of impatience. Geez. We were out on the balcony at 11 a.m., on a bright Saturday morning. I was his in body, heart, and name. But I still felt those invisible eyes burning as hot as the sun. After all this time, he still made me feel weak in the knees, and like a hot mess. There were moments that I still felt like I was tripping in my heels in that lobby, completely out of my league in the presence of the hottest man alive. But I kept that to myself. He had only asked one thing of me: to strip. My robe melted to the ground, and my body unfolded for him effortlessly. I stood taller, my neck a quivering, bare line that longed for his lips. I breathed in through my nose and out my trembling lips, but my chest still rose and fell with every gasping breath. My breasts were swollen, nipples hardened and aching like his fingers were pinching them tight. I was silk between my thighs, my core throbbing in time with my racing heartbeat. My legs tingled as he beckoned me to come closer. He dropped his cell unceremoniously on the table beside him, and retrieved a slender white box I hadn't even noticed. My eyes dropped to the sharp lines of it, its rectangular shape holding something that made one side of his mouth lift, a devastating smirk teasing the fire inside me. He slowly lifted the lid. I could almost feel his fingertips digging into me, his lips racing toward my wetness, the bite of his teeth as he... "Oh my," I whispered, taking in the neatly folded black strips inside. There were 4 of them, and one smaller bundle. They looked so soft, so delicate in his powerful hands. He unfurled the smallest bundle in a single movement. For a brief moment, heat rushed my cheeks, and I thought it was one of the G-strings he loved on me, even though I was still a little self-conscious about my curves. It wasn't a G-string, but the warmth sizzled a red path across my face nonetheless. It was a blindfold. He was on his feet in a single, fluid movement, and an involuntary moan rose in my throat. Looking at Jacob was a sensual journey, from the cropped, ebony hair that intensified the sharp angles of his handsome face, to the sky-blue eyes that drank me in like I was the best kind of sin, the best kind of delicious. And his lips. He'd only spoken one word, and I was already liquid and aching. It was the only word he needed. He was my dominant, and I was his submissive. It had taken me almost as long as we'd been together to learn that my submission was just as powerful as his dominance. Even more so in some ways. He could have my body, every which way, but I gave him the key with my obedience. He held the blindfold as he took my face in his hands. His smile deepened as he leaned in close, brushing his lips across mine. "I love you, Layla." Those words would never, ever get old. I was so filled with love, with lust that I felt like I could burst, raining Cupid's arrows and whips and chains all over the place. "I love you too." The smile dimmed, the dark lash of my dom pushing the romance stuff to the back burner. Whatever he had planned for me wasn't meant to be heartwarming. The things love songs were written about. This song would be a series of bleeps on the radio, a tantric mix of moans and pain, and consuming bliss. He was still waiting. I needed to say the words. Truly give myself to him. I stood tall, like I wasn't but naked. Like I didn't care that the whole world could see. Let them watch our erotic scene. Let them see how beautifully our bodies moved together. I'm yours, I said, hands by my side. Eyes locked on him for further instructions. He softly traced the line of my cheekbone, and his fingers swept my chestnut curls over one shoulder. He slipped the blindfold over the crown of my head, and I took one last look at my husband before I shut my eyes. The loss of sight magnified my other senses. I could feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. I could hear the buzzing of the city around me, and a ripping sound. I frowned when I heard it again, and realized that it was Velcro. Cuffs. I relaxed as I felt the first around my wrists. Both were bound and secured. My ankles followed suit. I let out a little gasp as one of the wrists were tugged, and Jacob's hand steadied me, then turned me 180 degrees. My wrists were pulled again. He was leading me in the wrong direction. Panic flared in my chest. Our balcony wasn't that big. That fact was confirmed when I reached out, and my fingers gripped the iron railing. The strike was immediate, and I had no time to prepare as his hand met the round curve of my ass. I knew my offense before he even spoke. Hands at your side. The bitter sting vibrated over my body, and I bit back my scowl. Not even all this time as his sub could dull my innate sense to fight. From his chuckle, he was glad that it hadn't. Do you trust me, Layla? I tilted my head to the right, toward the sound of his deep, rich voice. Do you mean do I trust that you won't throw me off the balcony? I licked my lips. Yes, I trust you. His hand smoothed over my behind, caressing the spot where he spanked me. Good girl. My wrist was tugged forward, doing the very thing he scolded me for moments earlier. I bit back the urge to address the contradiction. When my second was brought to the railing as well, and my body was pulled forward, I had bigger concerns. Was he tying me to the railing? Spread your legs. Brain functioning slowed to a crawl as I stepped out wide. My body was electric, from my toes curling against the cement, to the goosebumps that rushed up my calf, and the welcome ache of the chilly air against my erotic flesh. And then there were his fingers, tracing up and down my spine. Silent torture as he worked his way toward my behind. I'm going to spank you, Layla. The fingers tightened, kneading as he moved closer to the moist heat at my center. Be but. My protest became a moan as he spread my cheeks. One of yearning. Suddenly, I didn't care that I hadn't done anything that warranted a spanking. His fingers dove inside me, granting my plea, sending pleasure shooting to every nerve receptor in my body. My world, my existence was the rhythm of his touch. The way he drew in and out, the way I felt whole with him inside me. And then he stopped. My eyes sprung open, the darkness giving nothing away. His voice slashed through the silence. You're wondering why I stopped, and why you're being punished. I dipped my chin to my chest, then quickly answered, yes, sir. I owe you no explanation. But the sun is shining, and you look especially beautiful tied up. Helpless. I sucked in a gasp as I felt the muscular lines of his body, and the hardened length of his cock. I'm punishing you because there's nothing like watching your perfect skin blush for me. I couldn't help but tilt my head back, and he rewarded me by brushing his lips along the line of my neck. When he drew back to my ear, the gentle kisses were a distant memory. He seized my earlobe between his teeth. He bared down until I let out a shuddering breath. He released his hold, his voice thick with desire. I'm spanking you because I long to take you to the place of bliss between pleasure and agony. I'm spanking you because I want to make you cry and come all at once. Anyone else saying that would have been appalling. I wouldn't let them touch me with a 10-foot pole. But what Jacob and I had was the luscious taboo. No one controlled my body like him. No one else could make me melt with a single touch. He got that I needed to surrender, to submit to be free. Let's begin. My body exploded with pain as his hand collided with my skin. I grit my teeth and opened my mouth to keep count, but he rubbed the spot instead. His voice was just as soft and soothing as his touch. Counting is unnecessary. I want you to feel the strikes, and then you'll feel what you do to me. If I wasn't immobilized, I would have melted right to the floor. When the second blow landed, I was liquid, putty in his hands to mold as he saw fit. Even in the darkness, the world exploded in a rainbow of sensations. The burn of pain met the soft kiss as his hands caressed the havoc he wreaked. When I felt him untying my wrists, my ankles, I still gripped the railing. Tears burned my eyes, matching the stinging that pricked my bottom. In an instant, the world rushed up to meet me, the brightness overwhelming, sight and sound too much to bear. I squeezed my eyes shut as he spun me around to face him, and I moaned into his mouth as our lips met. We spoke our secret language, his kisses tentative at first, asking me if I was okay, if I was still his. I brought my arms up and circled his neck, bringing him closer. Even with my eyes closed, I saw him. His love, his passion, the rock-hard erection that pierced through his jeans, still taking my breath away. When my eyes fluttered open, I saw him staring back at me, that delicious smirk lighting up his face. You see something you want? My eyes dropped to his crotch, then shot back up to the blue. Oh yes, I gasped. Oh yes, sir. I'll forgive your slip because you're so adorable when you let out those little gasps. He brushed a curly tendril behind my ear, his fingertips trailing up and down the line of my neck. And I think you know what your moans do to me. He gripped my wrists and brought my hands down until my fingertips brushed the hard impression of his arousal. I was memorized by it, salivating for it. Bend over the chair, he ordered. As facing me, I obeyed, my hands flat, presenting myself to him, trembling with anticipation. Spread your legs. I thought you'd never ask. I didn't hear him unzip, toss aside his jeans. But I felt his hands grip my waist, teasing me. He'd take me rough. I'd feel the ache of this all day, and when I woke up in the morning, hot twinges would thrust me back to these moments when we belonged to each other. He drove inside me in a single absolute thrust, and I let out a mournful cry of bliss. Sad because I'd never get enough of him. Elated because I'd get to spend the rest of my life finding out just how deep this rabbit hole went. I clutched the chair helplessly as it rattled with every pounding thrust. He moved in and out of me like a man possessed. There was no rhyme or reason. He was wild, consumed by his lust. And I was a few little words away from exploding. Jacob, may I dash? His raw, guttural cry drowned out my question, and I felt his warmth spread inside of me. I stood there, chest heaving, body so close to finding my own ecstasy, clutching his still hard cock. Ready. And then he pulled out of me. I didn't move, still gripping the chair, eyes looking straight ahead, my release slipping out of reach. He always let me come. Well, until just now. I stood upright, questions volleying around my head like some brutal tennis match. He said he wasn't punishing me because of something I did. So what's going on? That can't be it. He gets his fill then goes on his merry way? But I faced him, and he was practically redressed. I watched in silence as he grabbed his coffee and advanced towards me. I took a little solace in the fact that he was at least giving me a kiss. He leaned in and planted his lips on my forehead. You can get dressed. I watched him go, hurt squeezing my vocal cords. And then I obeyed. Chapter 2. I stared at my reflection in the chrome doors of the elevator. My chestnut curls were pinned up in a way, a bun perched at the crown of my head. The scoop neck of my black sheath dress elongated my neckline and drew my eyes to a red mark near my ear. A little memento from Jacob. I quickly tugged my hair free from the bun, the curly tendrils masking the redness. Not that it mattered, since my cheeks were more than picking up the slack in that department. Cut it out, I muttered, yanking my hair behind my ears and standing a little taller. The doors opened and I didn't teeter, despite the 4-inch heels. Despite the fact that my Saturday morning with Jacob had gone from best Saturday ever to womp womp. I walked down the sleek executive corridor, my heels clicking on the floor. I gave Jacob's secretary, Natasha Lancaster, a crisp nod. We wouldn't be having any slumber parties since she had treated me like a gnat in her martini from the day Jacob brought me to his office, but we'd called a ceasefire of sorts, keeping things as cordial and professional as possible. Most days. Miss Montgomery, she feigned frustration, letting out a heavy sigh. I mean Mrs. Whitmore. When I glared at her, she shrugged a petite shoulder and flipped her white blonde hair. I apologize. I guess I'm still getting used to it. Understandable. I said bitingly, not returning her fake little smile. It has been only a year. And on the rare moments when she spared actual words for me, she called me Miss Montgomery, conveniently negating my marriage to Jacob and name change. If there's nothing else, I have a busy morning ahead of me. And it just got busier, she continued, turning her attention back to her computer. Robert Lenore is having his daughter sent over this morning. What time? Her fingernails clacked on the keyboard. What time is it? I glanced down at my cell. 9:07. Any minute now. That phony little smirk curled her lips. If you could handle Mia, Kent, I'm sure you'll do just fine. She didn't mean it as a compliment, but I decided to let it go. Mia was doing well. She decided to take some time out of the public eye, and when we talked a month ago, she was getting pretty serious with someone that wasn't toxic. But Jessica Lenore was a totally different story. She was 28 years old, but you'd think she was 18. Fresh out of some convent or uptight boarding school, drunk off the first taste of freedom. The tabloids were splashed with headlines about the heir to the Lenore fortune. If she wasn't on a yacht, barely clothed, she was drugged out in some bathroom in New York or LA. She was far from the first party girl heiress, spending thousands of dollars a night at the most exclusive clubs in the world. But she was the only one that would become the CEO of a billion-dollar multinational corporation any day now. Her father, Robert Lenore, was terminally ill. He had no other children. And despite the advice of his board, he wanted his daughter to take over the company. Jessica had a big image problem, and I was in charge of taking her from hot mess to badass businesswoman. And apparently that task was starting any minute now. I dropped my satchel near the door and opened the blinds, letting the sunshine in. I hated that the first thought that sprung into my mind was how warm the sun felt on my skin on the balcony, how it stroked the heat between my thighs. A heat my husband created then snuffed out. The wave of rejection crashed into all the questions. I asked him if everything was okay, and he looked at me with those bright eyes. He thought my question signified that I wasn't okay, and somehow it became about me, and not in the way I wanted. I couldn't form the words to explain to him that I felt rejected, that for the first time since we met, I felt hollow after we'd been together. I snapped the blinds shut, trying to block out the unwelcome dread that was doing numbers on my stomach. Not here. I had to check this stuff at the door. Wait until the clock ticked 5 p.m. to meltdown. Are you Layla? I spun on my heels, trying to keep my annoyance on its intended target. Like Natasha, who had a penchant for just letting people stroll into my office. But when I faced Jessica Lenore, I didn't feel remotely guilty for the scowl on my face. It went perfectly with the haughty expression on hers. I'd been expecting the woman from the gossip columns. Bleary-eyed, still dressed in her wrinkled dress from the night before, smudged makeup, teetering all over the place because she was still a little drunk. The woman before me looked like she wouldn't just dominate a boardroom, but she'd chew it up and spit it out. She wore a blood-red blazer with an ivory blouse beneath and tailored black slacks. Her heels knocked against the hardwood floor as she made herself at home behind my desk. She tossed a curtain of deep brown hair, jade green eyes cutting me off at the knees until I felt 2 feet tall. So I'm here. Now what? I may have felt slightly off kilter by her abrupt entrance, not prepared to help build up someone that obviously had their shit together. But I wouldn't let her know that. I could tell from the way she didn't even blink that she was used to intimidating people, walking all over them. Well, I had a killer poker face too. For starters, you can get out of my seat. She made herself comfortable, sinking into the leather with a sigh. You're my publicist, right? Which means you work for me. Which means technically you can get out of my seat, or I can call security, and they'll remove you from this building. Her fiery glare scorched the earth. I didn't back down, but I was hoping she didn't call my bluff. I'd seen publicists do all but wipe the client's ass to keep them happy and hopefully scandal-free. But I had a feeling that this was a pivotal moment. It would determine how effective I could be. Someone like Jessica wouldn't respect someone that kissed her feet. What could I offer her? How could I help her if I was just like everyone else in her employ? I had to separate myself, show her that I was a fighter, and I'd fight to ensure that the world and investors saw that she was born to sit at the head of the table. She blinked, then silently pulled herself to her feet. I bit back a smile as she circled back to the front of the desk, head still high like she was doing me a royal favor. I didn't rub her nose in it, taking my place and getting right to it. Why the charade? Her mouth twisted in confusion. Excuse me. Not a single hair out of place. Your makeup is perfection, enhancing your beauty without shouting it from the rooftops. Your outfit says young, sophisticated professional, and you walked into my office like a CEO would. I didn't mince words. You've got the whole world believing that you're some spoiled brat who can't stay sober enough to stumble into your mansion without flashing the world a view of your coochie. No one takes you seriously, and I can tell from the way you're flaying me with your eyes right now that it drives you crazy. I folded my hands on my desk and gave her my full attention, because I was sure this would be one hell of a story. So I'll ask again, why the charade? She pursed her lips, indignation scratching at her cheeks. Are you my therapist or my publicist? Are you going to answer my question so I can do my job? I countered. She gave me a long, quiet look, showing the first signs that there was more to her than meets the eye. She opened her mouth, her lips quivering, and I could have clapped with glee, because for the first time ever, I had a high-maintenance client that wasn't going to make me chip away at the layers to get to the root of why they needed me in the first place. Because when it came down to it, I was kind of a therapist. I was the number they called when the shit inevitably hit the fan. I picked up the pieces, and I made sure the world didn't notice the cracks. Jessica snapped her mouth shut, jerking to her feet in a single angry movement. I just remembered I have an appointment I can't miss. When her lips curled, she made a smile look like a snarl. I'm throwing a welcome home party tomorrow night at my apartment on 25th. You should swing by. Or wait for the pictures. And with that she breezed out of my office. Did she just dismiss me? And threaten me with some party that was sure to make my job that much more difficult? I mowed a hand through my unruly hair with a groan. I loved my job, but some days, needing someone to vent to tell me that I could handle the spoiled rich girl masquerading as a sorority girl, I abandoned my post and made the walk down the corridor toward Jacob's office. Natasha's eyes lifted from her task, taking in my dejected expression. She smiled like Christmas morning. Tough meeting. I ignored her. Is Jacob with anyone? No, but he's on the dash. Done with the conversation, I started down the hall towards my husband. I could already feel his hands around me, holding me tight, telling me I had this under control, telling me that we were okay. The sound of Jacob's voice stopped me cold. Jacob Whitmore had a reputation for being a force to be reckoned with when you crossed him. His voice always commanded attention, an innate power that made you want to take a knee like he was a king on a throne. But whoever he was talking to would get no mercy. After what happened in Venice, I told you that I wanted no more lies, no more secrets. And then you come to me with this. He let out a growl that made me take a step back. Mom, this changes everything. Ahem. I went rigid, my body so tight that I turned to face Natasha as slowly as possible to keep from snapping. And I was in no hurry to see the look of amusement on her face. Mrs. Whitmore eared to the door, too afraid to walk in and face her husband. As much as Natasha was smiling today, you'd think she was a kind person. You'd be wrong. Trouble in paradise, she mused all teeth. I fled back to my office, not confirming the obvious. Chapter 3. So I think we should flash them. Sure. I grunted, practically inhaling my glass of wine. I'll rip my shirt off and do a shimmy, maybe even a strategic nipple slip. I coughed, nearly squirting Merlot from my nose. I looked at my best friend Megan Scott, who stared back at me with green-eyed innocence like she hadn't just threatened to go girls gone wild. What did you just say? Does it matter? I've been talking for the past 5 minutes. Apparently to myself, she spat. I winced, pushing the wine glass a few inches away. Like that'll stop me. She propped her chin on her hand with a sigh and leaned forward until she created a strawberry blonde wall that she hoped the cameras couldn't penetrate. I'm still not used to it. Cameras following me when I'm running errands, waiting for me when I leave school dash. I wish I had some sagely advice for you, I interrupted. But I'm fresh out. I expected her to pry, to at least call me out for not even flinching as people inched by, probably wondering if someone legitimately famous was near. then continuing on their way when they discovered we were just famous by association. I'd landed the billionaire playboy, and Megan was with Cade Wallace, an actor who currently had 2 movies tearing up the box office. But Megan's gaze softened, her green eyes narrowing with concern, not suspicion. What's going on? When we met last week, you could barely take the smile off your face. Memories hit me in a wave and I swayed in my seat. Or maybe that was due to the second glass of wine I'd nearly polished off in the last hour, paired with little more than cheese and crackers. I chalked up the warmth that took my face hostage to the alcohol, because admitting I was remembering how happy I was, and the cause of it, I was just reminding myself of how far I was from that place. I'm pretty sure you popped over fresh out of bed that day. My eyes bulged, imagining that everyone on the patio was tuned in to our conversation. Megan, it's not like I said the S word, she snorted, then raised an eyebrow with mischievous intent. Then again, you're so hush-hush about what happens behind those penthouse doors. Maybe you guys are a little closer to the F word. Her lips split into a full-on grin when I gasped. Maybe the K word? That's none of your business, I spat, my cheeks on fire. Do I ask what your sex life is like? No, because it's private. So just drop it. The humor in her eyes froze over. You're mad about something, but it's not my bad joke. How about we talk about that instead of you jumping down my throat? I knew she was right. I was taking my frustration out on her, because I didn't have the guts to face Jacob. Talk to me, Lay, she said softly. All of a sudden the cameras seemed to zero in on us. Paparazzi leaned in for an exclusive. The billionaire's wife tells all. I gulped hard, but the knot was firmly planted in my throat with no intention of budging. It didn't matter that the fatigs breathing down my neck was all in my head. They were still camped out on the other side of the street, well out of ear reach. But I still couldn't make the words come out. Our waiter unloaded our food and I could have kissed him. It bought me a few moments of silence, stuffing my face, so the truth was buried behind my spinach and cheese ciabatta. But I knew I'd have to eventually spill the beans. My sandwich was half gone and Megan was still waiting. And not so patiently. How's your pasta? I asked, deflecting her stony glare. Delicious, she answered shortly, dabbing her mouth. Are you going to tell me what's up, or are we going to make awkward small talk like we're on our first date? I cracked the smallest of smiles. You're not going to let up, are you? Nope. Well, in that case, I swiped the bottle of Merlot and topped off my glass. Obviously, it has to do with Jacob. And me. Her eyebrow arched, the silent duh, hanging in the silence after my both obvious and vague admission. I held the bottle upside down, trying to get every last drop of liquid courage. The easiest thing would be starting at the beginning, but I was not going to share what went down on the balcony. So I fast-forwarded to the heated conversation I overheard. I think I paused, replacing the uncertainty with fact. I know Jacob is keeping something from me. Megan sipped her Italian soda, digesting the words as she stared at me strangely. No words. No assurances that I was acting mental and reading into nothing. Just dead silence. I picked up the mantle, glaring her down. After all the crap you gave me about opening up, I open up and now you're speechless? She shook her head. Not speechless, just unsure of how to put this without making you go off on me. Under normal circumstances, bring it on. She playfully flexed her muscles. But I don't think either one of us wants those kinds of headlines with our stalkers across the street, waiting for something picture-worthy. I waved off the paparazzi, focusing on other parts of her response. How to put what? She ran her fingers through her hair, tugging the red strands into a low bun, pulling her hair back. This was serious. Her jade-colored eyes locked onto me, and she pulled no punches. I'm getting an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, Layla. You overhear something, or he does something seemingly normal. Then you concoct this elaborate story where your husband, or boyfriend if we're looking back, is doing things to destroy your relationship. I don't have to concoct anything, I said indignantly. Real life is dramatic enough. As insulted as I was by her dismissing my statement, I couldn't blame her. With Rachel Larabi in the wings, I had questioned and doubted Jacob's love. Instead of trusting that he wanted me, and me alone, I let Rachel get in my head. And it almost cost me the love of my life. I get that this probably seems similar, Very similar, she clarified. But it's different, I finished adamantly. I know Jacob loves me, I really do. But I also know that he's hiding something. She spun her fork in a slow, thoughtful circle. Have you asked him about it? What a great idea, I said sarcastically, gulping down half my glass of wine. I focused on the numbing warmth of the alcohol instead of the fact that she was right. Asking him about it was a surefire way to get some answers. But it wasn't quite that simple. If I ask him, I'll have to explain how I know. I didn't have to say more than that before Megan started shaking her head. Again. Oh, Layla. What? I said defensively, nursing my glass of wine. I wasn't snooping. Not technically. Right. She held the eye for several seconds longer than necessary, illustrating just how well she knew me. I was going to see him, and I overheard him on the phone arguing with Alicia. I explained. He even said, "This changes everything." And then you asked him what this was? I dropped my eyes to the remains of my sandwich. It was completely eviscerated, like my flimsy excuse. Natasha was on the prowl. She saw me in the hall, and I was too embarrassed to go in. But I'm going to ask him about it tonight, I added quickly. You haven't even asked him about it, and you're already freaking out. She let out a whistle. You're setting him up to disappoint you. You know that, right? No, I had no defense, unable to come up with a comeback or concrete evidence to disprove what she said. Sure, the signs were there. Long hours at the office, the wham bam. Thank you, ma'am, that went down a few mornings ago. And the conversation I overheard all pointed towards Jacob going through something. Something he hadn't shared with me yet. Maybe it was a recent development. Maybe he was planning on telling me sooner. But he knew I was stressed about the new client. My heart twitched guiltily as I hung my head. You're right, I said, surrendering. Owning up to it. Well, cheers to that. Megan jokingly held up her glass. Pretty sure that's the first time you've ever willingly admitted I was right about anything. Keep it up and we're going to give the Foddigs a first-row seat to me taking you out, I said, tossing my napkin at her. Well, that's my latest drama, I groaned, in dire need of a subject change before I embarrassed myself further. How are things going your way? She jerked her fork over her shoulder at the paparazzi. Impromptu photo shoots aside, things are pretty good. My kids are still kicking ass and taking names dash. Same as your boyfriend apparently, I winked. A year ago, Cade Wallace, an action movie star that looked every bit capable of ripping someone to shreds on and off the screen, was battling a series of box office flops. Cade defied the critics who called him box office poison. His last movie was The Last Job, where he played a hitman with a heart of gold. And it was the highest-grossing action movie of the year. And if the spy thriller that premiered last week kept selling out theaters and getting praise from the same folks who mocked him, he was in for another record breaker. I was happy things had turned around for him, and not just because he was dating my best friend. He'd gone from my idol, a celebrity crush that made me sweat and act like I was 12 instead of 24, to a charmingly vulnerable man that was more than muscles and a ferocious screen presence. And then there was the flirting. Something innocent that ballooned until he kissed me, flagrantly disregarding my relationship with Jacob. With time, he respected the boundaries of our friendship, and he and Megan started dating. The past was so far in the rearview that I could barely make it out on the horizon. Even Jacob had let go of any bad blood. The name Cade Wallace used to turn his usually calm facade into that of a boxer. But now he was cordial when he was mentioned. I could tell from the way Megan fidgeted that she still felt a little weird talking about him with me. I couldn't help but smirk at the transition from tough love to coy and quiet, as she bit her lip, avoiding my gaze. You and Kate have been dating for nearly as long I've been married. You know I'm not secretly holding any grudges, right? As long as he makes you feel like the awesome, beautiful woman that you are, we're good. I went serious, wanting to make sure I wasn't mistaking her awkwardness about my colored past with Cade for some more recent transgressions. Maybe there was some sort of alpha male oddness going around the city, and our guys had it bad. He's treating you all right? The nervousness that settled over her relaxed, and the smile returned to her lips. Better than all right. We had our issues, you know all about that. She gave me a look that summed up all the drama when Cade pursued her, and she was sure he was just like the guys she usually gravitated toward. guys who definitely did not treat her alright. But he looks at me, and I swear we're the only two people on the planet. And when he tells me he loves me, I believe it with everything in me. I never had that before. She cleared her throat, emotion getting the better of her. With a sniff, she reached for my wine glass. After she downed the rest, she perked, tears of happiness still glittering in her eyes. I could see how happy she was, and after all the hell her exes put her through, seeing her smile and finally get the happily ever after she deserved made tears sprint to my eyes too. We both fanned our eyes, red-faced and laughing. Now if they would just take a picture of me where I don't look completely awful, I'd be set, I quipped. I picked at the rest of my sandwich. I wish I could tell you it gets easier with the photographers, but you pretty much have to embrace it or ignore them. Only two options, huh? She inhaled deep, then faced the street and waved. I guess sometimes, she said through clenched teeth, you just have to not give a fuck. She said it so simply, but it resonated with me. There was only one way to find out the answers to my questions. I had to summon up my courage, put all the fears of what if on silent, and just do it. Tonight I thought to myself, I'll ask him about it tonight. I plastered a smile on my face. Then I waved at them too. Chapter 4. Working late. Don't wait up, love. Under normal circumstances, after all I'd done over the past hour, Jacob's text would have sent me spiraling down, and I'd console myself by eating everything in sight. And then I'd turn to the liquor cabinet. Considering the root of the romantic night I had planned was to find out if he was keeping something from me. His short, somehow curt and sweet text revealed nothing. In fact, the empty chairs standing in front of untouched plates of spaghetti, and the delicious red I knew he loved was still corked, begging to be drank, and the quiet just intensified my questions. I glared down at my phone. My first instinct was to type back a wordy response, explaining that I'd made dinner, and even dessert. Personally made it, not ordered out. And I needed him home. Because I needed answers. Was he keeping secrets? Why would he keep anything from me? I put my phone on the table, safely out of Bat's hit insane texting range. This was probably why he kept things from me. Because he didn't want to worry me. Didn't want me to jump to ludicrous conclusions. I was leaps and bounds better at keeping my cool. But Megan was right. Reading into things was signature Layla behavior. So I sat back in my chair, closed my eyes and breathed in and out until the image playing on the back of my eyelids was Jacob, tense above a stack of deadlines. Not Jacob purposefully keeping things from me and throwing a wrench in our romantic evening. And then I knew just what to do. Sure, I could be a little crazy, but I had my charms. And my questions would be answered in time. There were more pressing issues. A way for me to show him what I had in store, and give him something to think about besides work. Warm from head to toe, I extinguished the candles, my pursed lips craving Jacob, needing to be wrapped around him, craving the feel of him pulsing and hardening, until everything, but his body and my body was irrelevant. The savory aroma of meat and spices didn't dull my hunger. I needed a different kind of sustenance, a satisfied fullness that had nothing to do with my stomach. I dashed up the stairs to our bedroom, the early evening sky a bluish purple that reminded me of the way Jacob's eyes changed when lust took over. What would his eyes look like when I popped over to his office to surprise him? There was only one way to find out. I zeroed in on the closet, pressing a button that rotated my dresses, and revealed the storage space where I kept odds and ends. Postcards from Venice, mementos from our favorite restaurants, my wedding bouquet, and a long, slender white box. I picked it up and shook it, just like I had all those days ago. The day my life changed forever, and I agreed to be Jacob's submissive. I ran my fingers along its spine, tracing the edges as I lifted the lid. The trench coat was draped in the box. The ebony material was soft to the touch. And just like the day it was given to me, I stripped down. I shimmied out of my bodycon dress. And the only items keeping me from the nude were the lingerie I'd ordered from Paris. A strappy, blood-red bra, and a gorgeous caged-back pair of panties that showed more ass than it covered. When I saw it I knew they were perfect. All the straps reminded me of being tied up, bound for him. And the panties, they were a visual come hither. He wouldn't be able to suppress the urge to grab it, squeeze it, spank it, A warm ripple of longing fluttered through my groin as I pulled on the trench coat. I made sure the knot was secure. I still had a journey ahead of me, the walk past the security guard, and a ride in the elevator until a wardrobe malfunction would be more than acceptable. My heart pumped with excitement as I breezed into the elevator and practically sprinted toward the lobby. I hailed a cab, the wind rustling my curls. I unpinned my bun and let my hair free. I rolled the windows down and imagined it was his fingers gliding through my hair, tugging it as he pulled me close and kissed me like he couldn't get enough of my lips. Like he couldn't get enough of me. I knew what lay beyond this buzz. The worry on the edges of the throbbing anticipation. But I put up a mental wall, not letting my doubt chip away at the desire. There would be time for questions. A time for me to breathe when he told me it was no big deal. For now I was just a woman, going to surprise her man in nothing but underwear and a coat. I paid the fare and strutted through the doors of Whitmore and Creighton. I smiled to myself at the memory of teetering on my heels. Those stupid shoes put me on a collision course with destiny. The guard Frank Miller perked when he saw me. His kind gray eyes mirrored the smile on his face. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore." Even though I knew he had no idea what was under my coat, or what I had planned, I still bit my lip. Not even the slice of discomfort could ward off the blush heating my cheeks. "Hi, Frank. How are you?" "Can't complain." He nodded his head. "Don't work too hard." I swallowed the amusement that rose in my throat, hustling toward the elevator. It seemed to move especially slow, climbing every step to the top floor. By the time it dinged and I was at my destination, I was practically hyperventilating. I moved down the corridor to Jacob's office, the sound of light classical music luring me to him. Classical music meant he needed some zen, or he'd start busting heads. I rapped on the door and stepped inside, not waiting for him to grant me entry. His gaze lifted from his computer and captured me. The shock in his eyes warmed as he took me in. A smile teased his lips as the pieces clicked into place, and he recognized the coat. I loosened the knot. My lips slightly parted as I shed the layer and showed him my intentions. Surprise. He rose from his chair, wetting his lips as he circled to the front of his desk. He leaned back, still the epitome of sophistication and power, even though his tie hung loosely and his eyes were doing bad things to my body. "You look delicious." His deep voice savored every word, and I felt my wetness soaking through my panties. I managed to speak, my voice rough and husky. "Thank you." He stroked his fingers through his dark hair, ruffling it in a way that made him look both playful and dangerous. "I remember the first time you put on that jacket. You were so nervous, so self-conscious about your body. You used the jacket as a shield, something to hide your perceived imperfections." He unbuttoned his cuffs and I watched his fingers, already feeling them deep inside me. "What is the jacket to you now?" His question caught me off guard, and my lips worked, but nothing intelligible came out. "What were you thinking when you decided to put it on?" he pressed. "You could have worn a dress, a t-shirt and jeans. There's a reason you chose to put on that trench coat." I dug my fingertips into my thigh to keep from shaking, to get a handle on my desire long enough for my brain to function, so I could do more than stutter. I looked inward for the answer. I clasped my hands together, the shake barely more than a tremor, when I met his steely blue gaze. The answer was in the fact that I didn't even stop to look in a mirror, or fuss over my body, making myself a nervous wreck. I was a wife, doing something for her husband, and nothing else mattered. The jacket represents metamorphosis. I moved toward him one step at a time, the predator with her prey in her sights. "I'm not the doe-eyed innocent anymore. You're my dom, but that doesn't mean that I can't take the reins every now and then." I stopped in front of him, the space between us hot with sexual tension. I smiled mischievously as I roped my arms around my back and unhooked my bra, letting it drop to the floor. "I can take what I want." He rounded the contours of my breasts with his eyes, and my nipples swelled like he'd already claimed them. I could feel him pinching them tight until I could take no more, and would die if he stopped. "And what do you want?" One look and I saw that his fly was bulging with what he wanted. Our wants, our needs were deliciously aligned. Me. I erased the remaining distance, so close to him that I could feel every tremor of his body. Jacob was struggling to maintain his composure. If this was what taking control was like, no wonder he loved it. I felt sexy, powerful. And it was just the beginning. I want to make you forget that anything else exists in this world except my mouth. I sank to my knees, hands reaching for his belt. His eyes were flashing. I was being bold, but they didn't flash with condemnation. He was thrilled, riveted, like he was watching me change before him. I vibrated from the inside out when he let out a deep, guttural moan as I stroked him, the fabric barely able to contain his arousal. I unzipped his fly and reached in, my hand wrapping around his bulging shaft. I drew closer, mouth close enough to touch, tongue close enough to lick, but I just stared up at him in awe. My husband, my everything, my dom, a slave to my touch. I leaned in and I swore he did too. My tongue darted out and tasted the warmth of his skin, tingling as I made a line from base to tip. I watched him, enamored as my tongue swirled around the head, savoring the salty sweetness like it was honey. Then I engulfed him, taking him into my mouth until I felt him hit my throat. I breathed through the stars, relaxing as I took him deeper. His second moan was feral as he rocked his hips and tears sprang to my eyes. I built a steady rhythm, and he let me control the beat. His fingers weaved through my hair, tugging, holding on to me for dear life. All I could taste was Jacob. All I could feel was Jacob. I took a breath, smiling up at him with my bruised lips. I want you to dash. He put a single finger across my lips, then trailed the finger down until he landed on my breast. He gripped the nipple tight, his eyes smoldering. That was incredible, little sub. His grip intensified as he gestured for me to stand up, never letting go of my nipple. I gasped when he took the other, squeezing it just as savagely. His smile made my heart stop, and my pussy clench with excitement. But what you want is irrelevant. It's my turn now. Chapter 5. The tables had turned. 5 seconds ago, Jacob was practically on his knees, his moans begging me not to stop. Now I was the one moaning, my nipples locked in his brutal touch, dangerously close to saying the word that would end it all. He relaxed his grip slightly, his voice a gentle caress. Do you want to proceed? The throb in my nipples spread out over me, a whisper that built in pitch until my body screamed for more. My skin was goose flesh, the warmth in my stomach a flurry of butterflies that made me shake. My core pulsed in time with my racing heart. There was only one option, one word that fell from my lips. Green. He released my nipples, but his fingers were still beautiful torture devices. He stroked downward, his touch so gentle as he slid down my abdomen. You want me to touch you, don't you? My nostrils flared uncontrollably as I nodded. Yes, sir. Please. A smile lifted one side of his mouth when I gasped as he dropped all pretenses and cupped my pussy with his hand. His ring finger rested on my slit. As incredible as your body is and how much pleasure you give me, your little stunt can't go unpunished. He slipped inside me, a finger on my swollen bundle of nerves. Then he denied me. I'll be lenient on you. In fact, I'll let you pick your punishment. How generous, I muttered, before I caught myself and dropped my gaze. I brought my eyes back up to meet his, biting my lip. Sorry. His eyes narrowed, but amusement burned like fire as he outlined my cheek with his finger, then dusted my hair over my shoulders. I could just bend you over the desk and spank you if that's what you prefer. No, sir, I blurted, practically shouted. I winced and lowered my volume several notches. I'll pick my punishment. Heat dominated my cheeks, my body as he circled me slowly. Waiting. Picking my punishment wasn't nearly as kind as you'd think. It was like picking my poison. Whatever I chose would be just as painful as it was pleasurable. Spanking. Teasing. I gasped. Teasing. I licked my lips and gave him my answer. I want to be teased. To be so close to release. So out of control that I can't stand it. Then you pull me back. Build me up. Let me taste your bliss. Then take it away. Until you're ready for me to climax. I added, trying to keep my voice level and unassuming. I didn't want him to see the real punishment that I just handed him on a silver plate. But Jacob's low chuckle saw right through that. If I believe you're deserving of a climax, that is. Crap. I knew he meant it playfully, but the thoughts I kept at bay stormed back to the surface. The memory of being so tangled up in him, so free, then shot right out of the sky, left wondering if I did something wrong. Stop it, I ordered myself, locking my hands behind my back. Benefit of the doubt, remember? So I stood there, finding his eye when he circled back around, aching for his touch, wishing that I had asked him for a spanking, because the slices of pain were always met with overwhelming pleasure. And then he had to feel what he did to me with his fingers, with his cock. I slouched, the minutes ticking by, and he still hadn't touched me. And then I realized that I wasn't waiting for the starting bell to ring. It rang the moment he started circling me. He was teasing me every time our eyes met, every time he denied me his touch. When his fingers brushed my lower back, I trembled, a moan trapped behind my clenched teeth. When he rounded back to the front, his fingers strummed my nipples. The echo of his pinch turned the gentlest of touches into a blow that ripped a moan from my throat, my core begging for more. Already begging for release that he clearly had no intention of giving me anytime soon. I pouted and he paused, his lips fluttering over mine, letting me taste the salt of his skin for a heartbeat, reminding me to breathe, and that he wanted me just as badly. His lips wandered over my jaw, then hovered at my ear. Spread your legs. I stepped out wide, hyper-aware of the way my juices clung to me. He inhaled the fragrance of my arousal, like it was the sweetest of perfumes. He cupped my sex again, this time spreading my lips and sliding his fingers into my warmth. I groaned, throwing my head back as he pumped in and out of me, his eyes filled with lust, lips parted like he was breathing in my moans. Once my entire body began to shake, he pulled from me, circling around behind me. It was probably a good thing too, because he missed my frown. I wanted more, damn it. I wanted to throw myself to the floor and kick and scream until he let me come. And I wanted more of the teasing at the same time. This D/S dynamic fulfilled the void in me that craved domination. It loved the challenge in giving my body and my pleasure over to Jacob. His arms encircled me, holding me close. So close that there was no question that he was dying to have me too. So close that our heartbeats synced, and our chests rose and fell in sync. Punishing you is punishing me, he said thickly. His fingers sank back inside me. He knew just where to push. Just where to linger, how deep to go and twitch to make me lose my mind. Jacob, I whimpered, wanting more, needing it. Tell me to fuck you, he said hoarsely. He pumped in and out of me, my whole body a sea of raw nerve endings that felt every last stroke. Fuck me, Jacob. He whisked me to the sitting area, and I smiled when I realized we were coming full circle. He pulled off his shirt and discarded his pants, dropping them beside the chaise. The chaise he'd ordered me to lounge on when he first hired me, when he'd commanded that I relax and touch myself for him. He had a different request now. On your hands and knees. Ass towards me. I obeyed his command, bursting with excitement. His hand rounded the curve of my bottom, and I braced myself to be spanked, but the strike didn't come. His other hand gripped my other hip, and he teased me with his cock. He drew it up and down my slit, letting me feel just how close he was, reminding me that he was the gatekeeper of my ecstasy. And then he took me. His first stroke was swift, filling me up, stretching me around the thick bulge of him. He drew out of me, then punched back inside, feeling me, completing me, tearing all the air from my lungs. I spread wider, giving him all of me. I rocked back to meet his thrusts. He gripped my hips as he took us closer to bliss. Every part of me felt alive, breathing it in, consumed by the ecstasy that only Jacob could give me. I reached the edge, my climax dangerously close to rebellion. Control was quickly becoming impossible. I couldn't hold it back much longer. Jacob, I moaned, begged. Please let me come. Come for me, baby, he said huskily. I want to feel you. Only you. I let go and my whole world was this feeling. I was free, falling into my climax, letting it consume me as my body squeezed him. He went rigid. Then I felt the warmth of him flowing inside me. I was finally whole again. Still catching my breath, I dropped to the chaise. I felt so open, so exposed to him, that I took it a step further. After all, I could always blame the question on post-sex delirium. I overheard your conversation with your mom the other day. I picked at my nails, trying to act nonchalant. Is everything all right? He didn't answer for a long, painful moment. I pulled my attention from pretending that it wasn't a big deal, ready to face him and be held accountable for kinda sorta snooping. I didn't even care. I just wanted to get it all out in the open. But his back was to me, the muscular expanse tight and unyielding. Jacob? If there's something going on, dash. He turned to me, his face stony and unreadable. There's nothing going on, he said gruffly, buttoning his shirt. His pants were next. When he faced me, I realized we really were doing some sort of history lesson. All the greatest hits. The trench coat, the chaise, and the impenetrable wall Jacob used to keep me out. His blue eyes were like ice as he yanked and tugged his slender black tie into place. When he spoke, I honestly expected him to tell me that it was none of my business. Chew me out for sneaking around and keeping this to myself for days. Instead, he ticked the box that read none of the above. Everything's all right, Lay. He turned back to his desk with a sigh. I'm sure you just overheard my mother being her usual self and me calling her on it. He shrugged, his way of closing the book on the subject. I really need to put a dent in this. He glanced at me over his shoulder with a half smile that I almost bought. That was incredible. All the books and blogs about marriage and being a supportive partner said I should give him space. Let him open up to me when he was ready. But slipping that coat back on, a coat that was supposed to represent how far we'd come, just magnified the fact that even after a year of marriage, we couldn't talk to each other. I smiled too, my heart heavy, my head filled with questions. I didn't ask any of them. I'll see you at home. I paused at the door, a knot in my throat. I love you. Love you too, he said smoothly, already lost in his work again. I held on to those 3 words as I climbed back into the cab, pointed home. He loves me. There was nothing going on. Only one of those statements rang true. The other sat in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Chapter 6. This was a measure of last resort. After Jacob walked around like everything was normal, when the truth flashed angrily in his eyes before he rebuffed my questions, I was left with one single, exceedingly uncomfortable alternative. I could ask the other person on the phone. His mother, Alicia Whitmore. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I sighed. A few minutes away from what my head was telling me was a huge mistake. I focused instead on how picturesque Granite Falls was compared to the city. The roads weren't full of cars stacked like sardines, or riddled with potholes. The scent of exhaust fumes and asphalt didn't invade my vents. All the not-so-charming things about the city were non-existent out here. Even the modest homes looked extravagant, and were flanked by white picket fences. Instead of smoke, money hung on the air out here. As beautiful as everything was, there was something off-putting about the manicured lawns and the perfectly painted homes without a smudge of wear or tear. Everything was a little too impeccable. Bad things happened in Granite Falls too. They just had the money to cover their tracks. What bad thing was Alicia and Jacob covering up? I pulled up to the gate in front of the Whitmore property. With the iron fence and extensive landscaping, you couldn't even see the house from the street. If my GPS wasn't barking that I reached my destination, I almost would have driven right past. Alicia Whitmore wasn't the kind of woman that did secluded or discreet. Money was important to her, and showing just how much she had was doubly so. The security guard snapped to attention, reminding me of the cold seriousness of the Buckingham Palace guards. He stared at me like I was wearing a ski mask, and had "I'm up to no good" stamped on my forehead. "Can I help you?" he snapped, not sounding very helpful at all. "I'm Layla Whitmore. Alicia is expecting me." The stern expression on his face relaxed, and he touched the rim of his ball cap. "Of course. Have a good night." He returned to his post without another word, and I gripped the steering wheel, suddenly getting cold feet. The gate creaked open, and I tapped the gas, pulling the car into motion whether I was ready or not. Even in pitch darkness, I was in awe of the estate. The drive was as smooth as butter, each side flanked by lush green grass and weeping willows. The mansion sat at the end of the drive, gothic and intimidating. It reminded me of some far-off castle in Europe. I expected a horse-drawn carriage to be parked out front, but there was only a Mercedes. Even though I'd talked to Alicia a little over an hour ago to arrange all this, the house was dark and foreboding. The only power Alicia has over you is the power you give her. Even though you're coming to her for answers, that doesn't mean you're weak. But I suddenly felt like every move was torture, my legs filled with lead. My heart clenched and released in time with my fists. My sweaty palms were unable to hold my grip on the keys, which led to me fumbling around in the dark for them. I exclaimed as floodlights flickered on, my vision blinded by the brightness. I covered my eyes, trying to adjust to the football stadium strength illumination. I heard the click of heels and struggled to get to my feet. Quite the entrance, Layla. Alicia's voice was as cutting as the cobblestones slicing into my knees. Is there a reason you're on all fours in my driveway? It's all the rage nowadays, crawling around on all fours, I joked. I was finally able to see the lady of the manor. She wore a cream-colored sweater, a black peplum skirt, and a frown. Her eyes were silver as she looked me over and shook her head. I'm sure you would know about such things considering your particular tastes. I guess I should have been happy that she was no longer calling me a gold-digging skank, willing to debase myself for a lavish lifestyle. But it still stung. I dropped my keys, I said, purposefully changing the subject. I just dash. She bent down way more gracefully than should have been possible in her red-bottom stilettos. She rose, dangling my keys between her pointer finger and thumb like it was a pair of dirty underwear. Thanks, I said with a forced smile. There was no you're welcome. She just dropped it into my palm and sashayed back the way she came. I scurried behind her, reminding myself that we had made progress over the past year. She was pretty good at hiding her disapproval in public, and her private disdain was a little easier to bear. After all, she didn't have to agree to talk to me at all, or invite me to her home. Baby steps were better than no steps at all, right? I swallowed nervously when she stepped aside to allow me entry, and the nerves melted into awe as I took in the decor. It was classic elegance with modern sophistication. Pieces of antique furniture were perfectly paired with sleek side tables. Artwork worthy of the best museums were framed in chrome. I couldn't wait to see the. You can stop right there. I froze on the Persian rug, barely 2 feet inside the door. What? She pointed at a room off to the side the entrance. From your call, I didn't guess you were coming over for the tour. Let's just get this over with. Well then. I bit my tongue and followed her into the room. She gestured at a Victorian chair and I sat down, surprised it was comfortable. Everything in this place seemed too beautiful to be enjoyed. Its purpose was perfection, to invoke envy and awe. She cleared her throat and gestured at the darkness behind me. I hitched a breath as a small, pudgy man with nervous eyes shuffled out and offered me a bottle of water. I thanked him, and he nodded in acknowledgement. In her own Alicia way, she was being a good host. That alone was leaps and bounds in the right direction, since I was pretty sure there were moments she wouldn't have offered me a glass of water in hell. She situated her petite body in a chair across from mine, the throne-like design not lost on me. Her salt and pepper hair hung longer than I'd ever seen it, the waves and slight curls softening her usual sharpness. Her eyes still sliced in my direction like a razor's blade, not allowing me to forget that this wasn't a social call. I gingerly sipped my water, my throat stinging as I swallowed. I placed the Evian back on the table and gasped as the butler sprang from the shadows, armed with a cylindrical device. He deposited the bottle into the container, then stepped back out of sight. Bottle service? I said incredulously. Alicia crossed her legs, reclining with a sigh. You married money, dear. Certainly such things should come as no surprise to you. I wanted to tell her that money or not, I was capable of putting my bottle of water on a coaster, and I didn't treat people like pieces of furniture. But things were awkward enough. Thank you for seeing me. I folded my hands in my lap. I'm just going to get straight to the point. I overheard a part of your conversation with Jacob the other day. I watched her for some indication of surprise. Or worry. I found neither. She shrugged a shoulder. And I talked to my son a fair amount. What is this regarding? The conversation seemed heated. I continued, not letting her see how nervous this made me. The only defense I had against her was that I didn't let it show that she intimidated me. Even after all this time, and all the cruel things she'd said about my relationship with Jacob, and the things she'd done to her own son, I wanted us to at least be cordial. From the permanent scowl she'd had on her face since I walked through the door, we still had a ways to go. Regardless of the bad blood, I still waited, hoped that she would give me a kernel of the truth. I'd even take it's none of your business. But she just sat there, eyebrows arched damn near to the vaulted ceilings, waiting for me to get to the point. I gritted my teeth and let out a frustrated sigh. Jacob said something about no secrets, then claimed that whatever secret you two are sharing changes everything. My voice got away from me, rising, matching the level of Jacob's tirade that day. It didn't help that she was sitting there, acting like we weren't even speaking the same language. None of this is jogging your memory? Is there some sort of amnesia bug going around? She snorted, clasping her hand to her chest like I'd just uttered something absurd. Only Alicia Whitmore could turn a snort into a slap across the face. Layla, if you came over here to discuss a conversation you overheard while you were snooping around Dash. I wasn't snooping, I hissed, the blush in my cheeks proving otherwise. I snatched my bottle of water from the chrome holder, chugging it until there was none left, and the rage in my veins dulled to a simmer. I put the bottle down and shook my head fiercely as the butler leaped to action. What's your name? His navy blue eyes registered surprise, then shot over to Alicia. She must have nodded because he answered, his voice low and unsure. Miles. Miles Randall. Thank you, Miles, but I can throw my own bottle away. Just because someone can afford to be lazy and treat people like they're nameless cogs in a machine built only to satisfy their every whim doesn't mean it's right. You're valid and so am I. Good Lord, Alicia huffed. Get down off your soapbox. The conversation was nothing. If you're so concerned, why haven't you discussed it with your husband? You think I haven't tried that? I fired back, lurching to my feet. I couldn't sit here, breathe the same toxic air as her for one more second. You think I didn't try everything under the sun before I came to you? I knew you'd treat me like I was worthless. Probably get in a handful of insults before I even walked through the door. I knew that I'd leave here disappointed. Then why did you come here? She snapped, showing the first sign of anything other than ambivalence. She reined it in as quickly as she unleashed it, sniffing and rolling her shoulders back. Head high. Why set yourself up for disappointment? It's not very bright, dear. This time I was the one that stared, eyes boring into the bitter woman in front of me. I knew her past. How in love with her late husband, Carlton Whitmore, she was. How his repeated infidelities ate away at her heart, until her son was left with the mangled remains. You're telling me that if you knew your husband was keeping a secret, carrying the weight of something heavy and shutting you out, you wouldn't do everything within your power to fix it? The smug tilt of her head faltered, and she blinked rapidly, caught off guard. The vulnerability I'd hoped for was in the way her lips parted, speechless, and the slight tremble of her chin. Had I finally reached her? Could she relate to the helplessness I felt? The frustration? The anger? And then the iron curtain fell back into place. She looked right through me, tapping the stem of her glass. Miles moved at the speed of light, filling her glass to the brim. She swirled it, brought it to the tip of her aristocratic nose, and inhaled deep before she kissed the rim. After a deep, hearty sip, she gently lowered it back to the table, flicking her perfectly manicured fingers through her hair. Just because you share my last name doesn't mean we have anything in common. I owe you no explanation. Her eyes darkened, nearly black with animosity. I owe you nothing at all. Before I could reason with her, she dismissed me altogether. I believe Mrs. Whitmore has worn out her welcome. Please see to it that she's shown the door, and encouraged to not let it hit her in the ass on the way out. Tears of anger and embarrassment blurred my view as I stormed out on my own accord, fumbling with my keys before I climbed into the car. As I sped back to the city, back home, an unsettling thought raced through my head. In a way, she'd answered my question. Jacob was right. Whatever the secret was, it would change everything. Anger turned me inside out, wringing and twisting my heart until I couldn't breathe. I wouldn't become Alicia. I wouldn't sit by while my husband kept secrets and shut me out. I swerved to the shoulder of the road, not even bothering to park as I punched Jacob's number. It only rang once before he answered. I had no time to practice what came next, so I just rolled with it. Hey Dash, you're lying to me, I interrupted vehemently, tears piercing my eyeballs, slashing their way down my cheeks. You told your mother no more secrets, but apparently it's just fine to keep secrets from your wife. The line went quiet, and for one infuriating moment, I thought he hung up on me. But the call was still connected according to my dashboard. I'm not dropping this. It's not going away. I snarled, my chest pumping, rushing to catch up with my racing heart. I know what I heard. Why won't you talk to me? I'm still sorting through all of this myself, Layla. He snapped. I was hit with this information, and then I had to verify it. I had to be certain before I took any action. My heart flip-flopped in the pit of my stomach. Baby, talk to me. Tell me what's going on so I can be there for you. He let out a heavy sigh, and that just made it worse. I could hear how much this weighed on him. My guy. My dom. Something was tearing him up inside, and he'd been going through it alone. I put aside my anger. I couldn't change the past. I could only be here for him now. It's going to be okay, Jacob. The scoff he answered with told me he wasn't so sure. My father wasn't the only one living a lie. I have a younger brother, and he wants to be a part of my life.